just as we started to last week, we make the turn now into styles, and we do styles this week and next week. But again, let me just take the first couple minutes to do a brief review, and we'll actually deal with the homeworks a little later in the meeting today. What I'd like to do is go through the first bit on styles and then start referring to people's homeworks as well as look at your indicator results, because I think it'll have more meaning as we're doing that. But thank you for sending those homeworks in. I'm just letting you know I'm not dismissing those, but we're going to do those after we run through styles for a few minutes. So the brief review of where we are, just continuing to try to make this something that feels like a system and doesn't feel like disparate parts for you folks, is, where we start with this prosperity system, this business execution system, is this distinction between judgmental and performative language, and that one is a little bit more for agreement or disagreement, and one is a little bit more for action. And that doesn't make one better or worse than the other, it just makes them different. And to the extent that you can see the difference, you're able to reduce a little suffering and stress. You're able to spend more time in the right kind of language when that language is required. Then what we shifted to 2 weeks ago is once you get out there in this game of business, inevitably, whether it's, you're moving your house or you're trying to get, Sonia, it was great to get a follow-up on your project, okay? Yeah. Whether you're trying to get a video recording done with a group of people, you have this experience of, boom, getting punched in the face. And the idea of this map is to continue to map over the judgmental languages on that downward-facing arrow, so you may notice that you yourself and other people are really signaling that they've lost their balance when they're launching into a lot of judgmental language to defend their position when what's required is language for action so that we can take the next step. And that really is the precursor to styles and what we discussed last week, which is the more you watch yourself and other people under pressure, the more you might begin to notice that even what people are responding to in terms of what's creating pressure for them starts to look recurrent, and their response for sure is going to be recurrent. And this was the discussion on the brain, that typically what happens to people biologically is certain parts of your brain are getting a shot of adrenaline, while other parts of your brain are getting shots of serotonin. And serotonin is a drug to kind of keep everything measured, okay, and adrenaline, of course, is an accelerant. And so in those moments, your body takes over your mind. And it's very interesting. I was talking to somebody who's done a lot of study on evolutionary biology, and he told me something the other night at dinner, and he said, Travis, there have been no biological evolutions for humans in the last 20,000 years. So all of our biology is still the same from 20,000 years ago, and when we experience pressure, we're not asking you to buy this, but we're just seeing more and more evidence of this scientifically. When you feel pressure, your body goes into a set of pre-designed behaviors to save your life. And what we were trying to signal last week is the problem with that, and this is important, if your response to save your life runs your business performance, all you ever do is break even. Because your life or death response is designed to have you just live. It's not designed to have you thrive. It's designed to just have you live. And so while there's a momentary relief, like, okay, the pressure's been reduced, what you may notice over time is you're not getting ahead and you're ending up in similar situations over and over. So the price of admission with this market force material is that you get that under control. You learn not to react so biologically to pressure. And when you get that under control, you have this really cool, I think it's cool anyway, experience of looking around. And you actually have a way of watching other people that starts to look different. Because everybody else is now responding to pressure in a way that maybe you're not, and you can actually very quickly pick up on what their style is. And then what you can do is you can repackage your approach, whether you work with them as a colleague, whether there's somebody that you report to, whether it's somebody who works for you, whether you're in sales and you're trying to meet with somebody to run a meeting. Okay, a first meeting in sales has pressure in it. And in that moment, if you know what the other person's pressure release valve is, you can repackage appropriately, and now all of a sudden you have a market advantage. And that's where we're going with this material. So the reason that you've taken the indicator is that we want you really digging in on yourselves, because that is price of admission. And what we will do between this meeting and next week meeting is we will start to convert over into, well, what do you think about other people and what's going on for them and how much you repackage your approach, especially when there's pressure in the environment. Okay, so that's what we've done so far. Any general questions or sticking points for anybody at this point in the series?
I had one question from last week that it was, how much of this do you think is kind of like our styles are generational? You know, if we're more millennials or if we're baby boomers, do you think that has an effect on our style, or do you think it's just all biological?
I think it's a great question, and my experience has been, and there's no scientific data, so I can only give you, experientially, is that we're finding that it seems to cross gender gaps, it seems to cross cultural gaps, and it also does seem to cross generational gaps. Now, what you may find is that certain styles are more in charge at different points in generational cycles, and that the baby boomer generation, for example, was much more of a power generation. So you get in, well, and we'll talk more of a tolerate generation, let's put it that way. So let's get in there, let's do our job. You're going to have the same job for 50 years, and then you'll retire from that job. So, a lot of baby boomers live in more of the tolerate approach to life. And that I would say for sure, okay, the generation, so what am I? I guess I'm a Generation Y, so I'm 1972. The generation behind ours is much more of an influence generation, or much more of a migrate generation. I don't even want to have a job. I want to work on my own. I want to do my own thing. Okay? So I think you're going to see some mapping over, and I'm very happy to talk to you about that offline and talk to you about some of the books that I'm reading. It's a lot of the research that me and my partner are doing, because we're really targeting our material for the next generation, because that's the generation that's going to be in charge for the next 25, 30 years. So we're doing a lot of work on the generational stuff. So you're going to find a lot of overlays that, this isn't the only thing you'll ever use, right? I think generational questions, gender questions, cultural questions, all map into this. But on an individual level, when we experience pressure, we say a lot of that stuff starts to go away, and a pure biological response to save your life becomes the predominant thing. And
okay.
Who was that was asking?
It was Lauren.
Lauren, okay. And so, Lauren, more than happy to follow up with you, and we can have some more conversations around that.
Okay, no, that makes sense. I was just wondering.
Sure. Okay. No, it's great. Guys, anywhere you want to start looking, politics, sports, take the conversation that we have today, and just wherever you like to watch people, maybe try a little less judgment about whether or not you like or dislike or whatever, and just try a little bit more, like, where is this person coming from? What is driving their behavior? And it gives you an uncommon way of looking at the world, because most people are listening through a filter of whether or not they agree or disagree with the person that they're listening to. Okay? So here we go, you guys. Let's dive into styles. You have this in session 4 in your workbook, and the agenda this week versus next week, a little different. Today what we want to do is walk you through, there's a grid in your workbook. I can't remember the page number, but we would want you to be looking at that grid. We're going to try to pull some things off the grid. We're going to talk about each style a little bit. We're going to go through the fundamentals, and we're going to look at this group's responses to the indicators, so that you can see, if you look at a collective group, many of you tested out as the same style, but your raw scores were very different. And that's important to understand. We're not saying that just because you guys are similar styles that you're all the exact same person. What we're saying is that you might have a similar primary concern, and so that'll make more sense as we go. And then next week what we're going to do is look at some of the interrelationships between the styles, and we'll talk a little bit more about what your raw score could mean and things like that. So this one's broken up. There's plenty of time for questions and these kinds of things, because this does tend to get to the point where people get pretty interested in themselves and others. So any question you have as we go through, just feel free to jump in. There's plenty of time. Okay? So a couple of things to say before we officially jump in, and a little bit of run-up here is that if you were to coach somebody in a sport, one of the things that you would do, especially if it was an individual sport, is you would want to watch that person play in a tournament. You wouldn't want to just watch them play in practice, because in practice there's no pressure and people do a lot of different things, but you put them in a tournament and the lights come on and all of a sudden they're going to start showing you their style of play. And certain people play the game of tennis, for example, very aggressively, maybe serve and volley, put a lot of pressure on their opponent, try to end the points early, dictating to the other person what's going to happen. And certain other players in that individual sport are going to be more known as backboards, get a reputation for getting every ball back, super fast, they run every ball down, they're hard to beat, they never beat themselves. And the reason that we like to start here, you guys, is one of the things we want to make sure you're not doing as you listen to this is that you're thinking from the standpoint that you want to be a certain style, or that it's better that you are a certain style, or it's bad that you are a certain style. All of those are judgmental conversations that we'd like to have you root out of your consciousness. It's more about understanding your strengths, because in the game of tennis, okay, by way of metaphor here or analogy, both styles can win. If you know anything about tennis, the man on the right here and the man on the left, these are two of the greatest tennis players in the history of the sport. And the guy on the right plays much more aggressively in terms of trying to end points early, and the other guy just runs every ball down, and they both are champions. So the only reason you want to identify this for yourself is so that when you feel pressure, you can actually trust all of your instincts, and you're not trying to have to think your way through a biological response. You can actually go, you know what, this is when I'm naturally really good, so I'm just going to go for it. I'm going to let it loose. And that's just an easier way to play than to try to change your biology, if you will. Now, in a team sport, it would be the same kind of thing. In a team sport, we would say, look, are you left-footed or are you right-footed? Are you better at offense or are you better at defense? Okay, and if you're left-footed and better at defense, we might put you on this side of the field. And it doesn't mean you will never kick the ball with your right foot just because you're left-footed. Don't ever listen to these styles in extremes. It doesn't mean that you can't do any of these. It's just about understanding what you naturally do under pressure. And that's another way of saying all of these styles are incredibly critical. And if you do work on a team, it's useful to notice what you have on your team so that we can play to your team's strengths. Okay? And that's what we call a strengths orientation, which is very different than what a lot of us are used to, which is a weakness orientation, which means you get a report card that looks like this, and everybody immediately focuses on your area of weakness. Now, we're not going to pretend to weigh weaknesses per style, but we are at first going to say, let's really focus on what you do really, really well and leverage those things. Now, I've been saying this a couple times, just one more time. Twofold conversation here. One is we want to get an idea of what your style is. We want to get at least directionally close after today. Some of you will feel like, I got it. Others of you will go, nah, I've narrowed it down to 2. That's okay. Okay, we're not trying to force this. We're just trying to get as close as we can so that we can do the things that we're talking about in terms of playing to your strengths and intervening in things that maybe you don't need to do. The bigger picture item is that we want you to start focusing on other people. So purpose number 1 is critical because you have to know it so that your biology doesn't run your life. But purpose number 2 is where we start to focus on other people. And you can start to do things here when you open your eyes. Okay, you guys have all seen this before. Open your ears and close your mouth. What you'll start noticing is people are tipping their hand all the time. And once you see what their style is, you can do these really cool things. You can redesign your presentations. If you're in a recruiting capacity, you can think about who you might need on your team. If you're trying to work through breakdowns with other people and understand that you have styles, tends to remove some of the pressure out of the environment and some of the unworkability, and now we get through things a little bit quicker. Okay? So there's all these things we can do when we're more thinking about other people. So as quickly as we can, without rushing, we want to get all of you off the conversation for this is meaningful about me. We'd rather have you in the conversation of, well, how does this impact what I do with others? Now, there are 2 things you're not allowed to do with this material, and if you do them, they're going to hurt you and they're going to hurt me. So I've got a vested interest in this. Okay? Number 1 is don't use this information as a shield from accountability. What that can start to look like is some people will say, I'm a control, so I can't do this, or don't ask me to do that because I'm a power. And we really don't like that because an unaccountable person will find any excuse not to do something, and market force can be an easy fodder for that. Well, I'm an authority person, so I can't do this thing that you're asking me to do. No, not true at all. Okay, we all have competence and ability to move around and do other things. It might not be your natural best position, but if we still need that position to be covered on the field, just do it. Okay? And the second one that you're not allowed to do, and this one will cost you a lot of identity and will hurt relationships if you're not careful. So hear me out on this, is don't just walk up to somebody who has no familiarity with these concepts and stab them with it. So, hey, Jim, you're an authority guy. Okay, in that moment, the person's going to be like, well, what are you talking about? And they're going to be offended. And they should be. Okay, so we really recommend that you don't do that, and that instead what you do is if you think somebody is an authority, just use some of the techniques we're talking about now to make it a better relationship. And when that happens, they may even ask you, like, hey, wow, you know, a year ago we couldn't even work together. What's changed? And in that moment, you might have an opening to show them something. But if you just impose it on people, they literally have the experience. I'm going to skip that slide. They have the experience that they're being stabbed. And then the final note, I alluded to this, but I want to reemphasize it, is that your style does not equal your personality. So the way that we describe this is if when we look at the results today, I think 5 or 6 of you tested out as powers. We're not saying that all of you are the exact same person. And that would be a ridiculous premise. What we're saying is that your style happens to be a shared concern. Okay, so all powers have a primary concern for stability under pressure, and then how they deal with that concern reflects their personality. So some powers might be more introverted, some powers might be more extroverted, okay, and that's a personality conversation, but all powers would have this primary concern for keeping things stable. So we would never suggest that all of you are cookie cutter, because that would be a ridiculously unfair thing to do, and we would never do it. So please try to not listen to this as a personality. Listen to it as a primary concern when you feel pressure. Okay? And with that, let's hit the water here and take a look at the grid where you will notice we have all 4 styles across the top. We've got viewpoints, liabilities, and assets down the left. We have some examples at the bottom, which are now getting to be pretty, dated, and I need to update those. But this is where, those examples at the bottom are hopefully feel kind of fun. Like you look around and you notice there's people who've been successful in all categories. There are people maybe you don't like in all categories. This is all about just what drives human behavior. And what we're going to do, you guys, is go through each style for about 7 to 10 minutes. Plus or minus, and control takes a little longer because we do a little setup for the other styles. But again, any point you have a question, that's when you jump in. So we're just going to go from left to right. We'll start with control. Control people tend to be a little bit more like your director. So what they'll do, especially in situations of pressure like meetings and things like that, is you may notice that they actually come out and sit at a certain place inside the meeting room. And many times it's at the head of the table. And even if this person isn't in charge of the meeting, they're sitting down there because, hey, look, where else would I sit if I feel like I'm a director in the world and my perspective is to view the world through a director's lens? And that's going to build a very different reputation and nickname in the game of business than the other styles will build. This style, as we talked about last week, under pressure, tends to want to focus outward on telling other people what to do. And a lot of that has to do with that they speak from a particular position in life. And this is meant to be a little bit of a funny here. But control people we refer to as shoulders. We claim that they should all over everybody. Okay? So here's what you should do, and Jim, here's what you should do, and Paul, here's what you should do, and it's just should. Okay? And a lot of that has to do with, well, and we did discuss this, that these people naturally focus on making declarations. And a declaration is about the future, what we should do in the future. So these people are predisposed to saying to other people and announcing, sometimes unsolicited, well, here's your declaration. Here's what you should do. If you look at the next good one is this operational time frame. And this is a great one, you guys, for identifying other people, by the way. I'll give you some signals on that. The nickname is a really good one for identifying other people. The operational time frame is a really good one for identifying other people. And the language pattern, or where they speak from, is a really good one for identifying other people. And what you will notice about control people is they are very future-oriented. They are constantly looking into a 5-year time horizon. Or if it's not 5 years, it's 2.5, it's 2, it's 3. It's something more than just the next short period of time. So many times these people work off of a long-term strategy, for example. And you'll meet a lot of control people who don't even have resumes because they're completely unconcerned about what's happened in the past. And they don't want to talk about it. And if you ask a control person about their past, they get really ornery, like, well, who wants to know? Who's asking? Okay, because they're so forward-leaning, everything that's happened in the past is water under the bridge anyway. And that's very interesting to think about, because if we foreshadow now, so think about this, you guys. Look over here at an authority person whose primary operational time frame is to do analytics about the past so that I have all this evidence so I know what to do going forward. So we like to refer to authority people as more like your history channel. So what do you think here? Maybe Tammy, do you think these people naturally get along in a first meeting, or they might have some friction?
I think they might have some friction initially.
Yeah. And it's not because one guy's right and one guy's wrong, or it has nothing to do with that, right? It's just very different perspectives on the world. One person's going, you know what are we going to do about our strategy? And the other guy's going, well, let me see your evidence from the past. And that can create a lot of unnecessary friction. Okay? The next one that's pretty decent, you guys, is this one that says promises mean. And what I want you to do is what I've just done on the screen. Write on your grid, just next to promises mean, write down commitments or write down sincerity. And then draw a line pointed down from promises mean to survival conversation. And beneath survival conversation, write down looks like real risk. So the reason that we're having you do this is, well, twofold. Number one, we want to show you that people, when they make promises, actually have a different level of commitment. It's not that, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with them morally or ethically or anything like that. It just means that they have a different way of making promises in the world. And a promise is where you introduce one of the places where you introduce a lot of pressure. And so how people promise will be influenced greatly by their primary fear in the world. And we call that a survival conversation, which means that that is the thing to each style that looks like absolute death. Let me show you what I mean, and then you guys ask questions. So for a control person, what looks like absolute death is if other people know that I don't know, and I look stupid here, I will die. So when I'm asked to make a promise, I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to hedge my bets. So I'm going to make sure that my yes is a maybe, so that if I see that there's another way I should go or a better idea, I can come in tomorrow and change my mind. But if I say no, I mean absolutely, positively, unequivocally no, and I don't care how much evidence you show me, I will not come off my position because I can't be wrong, because then I would look stupid and then I would die. That, again, never asking for buy-in, but does the concept make sense there that the survival conversation is influencing how that person makes their commitments? That make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you think about this, if you've worked with a control person ever, and many of you I would imagine have at some point in your careers, what you'll notice is this person will say, we're going this direction, and they're 100% certain, and then 2 weeks later they may completely change direction. And that's because their yes is a maybe until they figure out a better idea. And you may have also noticed that if you try to convince that person that their idea is wrong, it's a pretty futile exercise. Okay? Next one that's really good is the first one here under liabilities. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm skipping one. It's actually our best one, so let me back up. Next to competence versus sincerity, please write down the word trust. And Renee, let me focus this one on you. Renee, how important is it for you to produce trust with your colleagues, with your clients, whomever you work with on a day-to-day basis? Important or not important?
Very important.
Yeah. And this is why I was saying earlier to the question that was asked that, by Lauren, really across cultural boundaries, across industry boundaries, anywhere we go, you ask people about trust, and all of us tend to agree that it's an incredibly important thing to produce. Well, Renee, let me ask you this. In your own words, how would you describe what trust is? And many times the easiest way for people to answer that question is think of somebody you trust, look underneath it, look at the relationship. Why would you say you trust that person? What are the elements present in the relationship for you to say, you know what, I really trust this person? What would you say?
They've always stood beside me. They've always backed me up. I guess that's how I would rate it. Okay.
Yeah, and they've always backed you up. And what was the first thing you said? They've always
stood beside me.
They've always stood beside you. Okay, very fair. Okay, so tell me what you think. The way that we lay this out is that maybe the stood beside you is they've always come through at some level. Okay, so they've got this ability to perform, and they've always backed you up, which is they're never stabbing you in the back. They're very honest in their speaking. They've always been authentic when they've told you that they would do something, and we call those competence and sincerity. Not trying to force it. How does that feel to you? Is that a fair representation?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if you look at this, you guys, most people tend to agree with us that if you get one of these without the other, it's incomplete. So if you meet somebody who's really competent, but they're stabbing you in the back, you're not going to trust them. By the same way, if you meet somebody who's really sincere, but you don't believe that they can perform, you tend not to trust that person either. So it's an and conversation. Everybody needs both, but what we're trying to signal here on your grid is that there's a rank order that's different depending on the styles. So control and authority people tend to need competence first. Then they worry about the authenticity, the likability, the sincerity piece. Whereas influence and power tend to go in the opposite order, which is they need a little bit of that sincerity, they need a little bit of that authenticity, they need that professional friendship. Then they'll worry about how competent you are. And so what's really interesting about this, you guys, is what happens to most of us under pressure is what? Well, we start defaulting to our primary trust concern. And if it's not the primary trust concern of the person across the table, not only are we not building trust, we're actually damaging the trust. So sometimes what you'll see is you'll get an influenced person in a first meeting with a control. And the influenced person starts the meeting with, hey, where'd you go to college? Are you married? Where are you from? Do you have any kids? So they're doing what would make them feel good to build trust, which is build the sincerity side of the equation. But they're talking to somebody who really doesn't give a shit. Okay, to put it nicely. And so the control person is sitting there going, man, the more this guy asks me these types of questions, the more I feel like he's incompetent. And then you'll get vice versa, which is you'll get an authority person meeting with a power, and the authority person comes in and goes, okay, boom, I don't really care about who you are, let's just get down to it. And they almost steamroll the power person. The power person's going, I don't really like you, so I don't really care how competent you are. And so even though, like Renee said, we all tend to agree that trust is really important, what we forget is people have different ways of going about building it, and if you're focusing on your primary trust concern and it's not the other person's primary trust concern, it can be a real problem. How does that feel to folks? Does that make some sense? Connecting with that or no?
Yes.
Yeah, this totally makes sense to me.
Okay, good.
Being an influence person, I absolutely relate to that.
Yeah, okay, and so you might look back on some relationships where you've focused a little bit more on the sincerity piece, but maybe you were dealing with a controller and authority. It just wasn't working. It wasn't connecting. It didn't feel right, all that kind of stuff. And maybe you figured out, like, you know what, I got to get off the sincerity piece and get down to the bullet points and get down to, you know, whatever we need to do. And what we're hoping is by showing it to you this way, you know, you don't have to go through the mistake first. You can just walk in and, again, you know, you go, oh, I think this guy's an authority, so I'm going to start with the competence first. And this is the other part, you guys, that's really cool about this, is that it actually gives you a little bit of a roadmap to see that you are building trust. So when you're dealing with a controller and authority person, and after 50 minutes in the conversation, they finally ask you, so where are you from? Are you married? Do you have any kids? What they're signaling is, well, I'm checking the box on competence. I'm now moving to sincerity. So you can feel confident that you're building the trust. The same way that if you're dealing with somebody who's an influence or a power, 50 minutes into the meeting when they go, okay, you know what, let's get down to business, let's get down to work, what they're saying is I can now check the box on the sincerity piece. I feel like we're connected a little bit. I'm now ready to get down to business. And so for me, and a lot of people I've shown this to, this becomes one of their favorite distinctions because trust is so critical, like Renee said, and you're given just a little bit of the seams on the ball about how you might go about building trust out there, okay? A little bit of insight about how you might go about building trust. Make sense, everybody? Questions on that? Okay. I'll take that as a no. So the question that we always ask here is, well, what do your clients or colleagues focus on first, competence or sincerity? And, of course, it's a trick question because it really depends on their style. So it's a great way now to kind of walk out there and really think about, well, is this person a competence first person or a sincerity first person? Okay. Next one that's really good has to do with what each style confuses with accomplishment. So this is under a liability here, so it's going to sting a little bit for all of us. And on this one, we're going to go all the way around the horn for each style, and then we'll be moving on to the other styles here in a minute. But the idea here is we need all of these things to be successful. We need good ideas about the future. We need good relationships in the moment. We need some ability to produce and replicate over the next 90 days. And we better do some reflection on what's working and not working from the past. So we need all of these things. But what starts to happen is each style thinks the thing in their category is the only thing we need. So what a control person will do is they'll start coming up with a new idea every week and never executing on any of those ideas. So it's like this guy that spins a lot of plates. Influences will build a lot of relationships but then forget to ever close any deals. So they'll confuse relationships with accomplishments. Powers will do a lot of work and they'll forget to ever look at whether or not that work is paying off. So they'll confuse being really busy or replicating with accomplishment. And authorities will fall into that analysis paralysis trap, which means they'll look at things and look at things and look at things and forget to ever make a decision. So all of these are negatives, and this is a sign that somebody's really lost their balance and they're really focusing on only one thing to be successful, and the game requires more than one thing. And in the case of controls, controls will spin a lot of plates and they'll forget to ever follow through. Okay? Now, we talked about this last week a little bit, that the emotion projected for a control person in a breakdown tends to be a little bit more on the arrogant side, like, what didn't you understand about my idea? Influence people want to migrate, so they become very impatient. Power people get frustrated with all the work that we're not getting done. And authority people begin to go indifferent, and they start to hibernate and look at data as opposed to sticking in there and trying to force things through to a decision. Okay? And then finally, guys, on control here, let's move to the assets. And so this is back to the best spot on the field. The best spot on the field for a control person tends to be in more of a forward-leaning position. So more systematic, about where we're trying to go in the future, a little bit more focused on the marketing, how we might represent ourselves in the marketplace, intention or goals about the future, and there's a lot of wisdom for this style and what they can see in the future to really help us move the ball forward. Okay? So that style always takes a little longer. That was about, I think it was about 14, 15 minutes. So we did a few that will map over. But any questions here, you guys, on control as a style in general? Okay. Let's talk about influence. And what's awesome here is all we need to do to talk about influence is have you write down 3 words just above influence right on your page. Just write down these 3 words in this order. Write down ready, fire, aim. Okay? And we're done with influence. That's all we need. I'm just teasing. Okay? But this style tends to be much more of a ready, fire, aim, go, 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 let's just do something, okay, we don't need to overthink it, boom, boom. So the nickname that this style will tend to produce out there in the world is more of a facilitator. So these are the people many times if you walk into that meeting where the control guy's sitting at the head of the table, the influence guy is the one who jumps up and makes sure you get introduced to everybody because their focus is on relationships and making sure that everybody feels like they've been connected. Okay? So under pressure, this style will want to move. So even meetings like this, a lot of times the influence person is the one that has to get up and move around and pace, go out, get some coffee, come back. My wife is influenced, and when I want to talk to her about, numbers as it relates to our marriage partnership, what we've learned is we have to go on a hike. Her body has to be in motion in order to concentrate. Okay? This style tends to focus, as we said last week, on freedom as their primary concern, which means their language pattern will sound a lot different than a control because they'll be more in a could space. Well, we could do that. Yeah, well, we could do that. Well, we could do this. Why don't we try this? We could do this. We could do this. We could do that. We could do this. So many times trying to narrow an influence person down to one direction becomes kind of tough because it's a restriction on their freedom. So they tend to live more in the moment. So you will find that these people live more short-term, like what's happening now. I've got a data point now. I'm going to change directions now. If you look next door to influence, powers tend to live in the next 90 days. So they're not quite as future-oriented as controls. Like they're not 5 years out into the future. They definitely don't want to look at the past. They want to plan over the next 90 days so that we can produce tangible results. So similar to what I put up there before, what you'll notice is that many times in a first meeting, these two styles will not get along. Because the power person's like, look, I don't want to know how we're going to change things every day. I want to plan over the next 90 days. So there can be some friction in an initial meeting between these two. Okay? Influences have a very different survival conversation. Yes equals maybe, no equals maybe. And that's driven by a fear that if I have to do what other people say, I will lose my freedom, so I will die, semicolon, screw you. I'm at least cracking myself up if nobody else is going to laugh, okay? But influence people tend to be very onery if they're put in a position where they have to do the same thing over and over. It's not going to end well. They do not like that approach. They want more freedom than that, okay? They tend to be sincerity first. I think that was Lauren. I'm not sure, Lauren, if that was you. I think that was you that said you're more on the influence side.
Yeah, that's me.
Yeah. And so what you may notice, Lauren, is if I called you up and we didn't know each other and we were meeting for the first time and I said, hey, Lauren, do you want me to come to your office or would you rather meet at a coffee shop? Which one might you choose in that scenario?
I would choose a coffee shop.
Yeah. Okay, and so this is what I mean, you guys, is I use questions like that to help me figure out somebody's style. If I ask a control person, what do you think, Lauren? If I ask a control person, do you want me to come to your office or would you rather meet at a coffee shop, where's that guy going to pick?
His office.
Yeah. And so I don't know anything else yet, but just when I gave the person a choice, they chose a more competence-based thing if they said their office. They chose a more sincerity-based thing if they said a coffee shop. So I don't know anything yet about Lauren, but when I show up, I'm going to focus more on sincerity first than confidence to try to build trust. Is that making sense? Does that make sense, Lauren?
That makes sense to me, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, so influence people will confuse relationships with accomplishment, so they'll know everybody in town, but they'll forget to ever ask for the deal. In a sales context, you'll see some of the guys like this in brokerage who have built vast networks of relationships, but they're not closing any deals because asking for the close might risk the relationship. So sometimes influencers won't do it. They'll get impatient under pressure, which means they'll overpromise and take on more than they need. But from an asset position, when you get this person, trued up a little bit, their best spot on the field is in charge of bringing in new relationships, opening new markets, taking on and starting new projects, these kinds of things, because these people tend to work very well with missions or challenges as opposed to routine situations. Their leadership focus tends to be on how people are feeling, what the mood is everybody enthusiastic, is everybody excited? So many times influences are a big bellwether. If the influence person is in a bad mood, a lot of times the whole mood of the office will go down. If the influence person is in a good mood, everybody else trues off of them, and now everybody's in a good mood. And their cardinal virtue is for courage or valor. So many times the first person to speak on these types of calls are influence people because they'll just wade in a little bit sooner than all the other styles. So questions, comments there from anybody? Is this going okay? Everybody with me? I didn't lose everybody, did I?
Going okay. Good.
Okay.
I'm still here.
Okay, good. So we're going to be done with this in about 10 minutes. We're going to look at your indicators, and then we're going to have, a good 15 minutes or so to answer, do some question and answer on this. So let me just get through the other two styles for 5 or 6 minutes each so you get some of the, feeling here of how they're different. So power people tend to build their reputation more around being the busiest person that you know. So the same meeting that you go in and there's the control person at the head of the table and the influence person is jumping out of their seat and migrating towards you and getting you introduced to everybody, the power person tends to fly into the meeting like 5 minutes late because they're so busy with all the stuff they're working on. So if you really want to upset a power person that you know, bring your car into the office the night before and have somebody give you a ride home. And the next morning, the power person in your office will think somebody else got there before them, and the next day they'll come in even earlier. Okay, so that was a joke. But that is the thing for powers is they want to build their reputation around being the busiest person that you know, which is driven by a survival concern for toleration. So they'll take on typically more work than every other style. And that's driven, of course, by what their desire is, which is to have stability. So the language pattern that you'll hear from a power person is, don't talk to me about what we should do, and let's not talk about what we could do. I mean, guys, what do we have to do? So power people are notorious for having extensive to-do lists, and many times they'll even make to-do lists about their to-do lists because it's all about all the have-tos that they're working on. And so power people actually sit in meetings listening for requests. Is somebody asking me to do something? When is somebody going to ask me to do something? Oh, you just asked me to do something. Let me put that down on my list, and now I have a have-to, and now I can go get to work. Okay? As we talked about, their focus tends to be a little bit more on a short-run time frame to get results, and they have a sincerity base. Now, power people need about 5 minutes of connection time, and then they want to get down to business. Influencers tend to need about, 45 minutes of connection time, and then they'll be interested in getting down to business. So the length of time in the sincerity-based conversation is typically a little different between influence and power. Okay. Next one that's really good is that they will focus on doing the same thing over and over, and they'll forget to look at whether or not that's paying off. So priorities is a big thing with powers. Good thing to help them with if you work with a power person is just do a weekly or every other week check-in on what the priorities are. That tends to be very helpful for power people. And this is the one that's kind of interesting, you guys, is take a look here. Power people tend to live in a world where they want a seat at the table, and they can actually be a little bit offended if they're not included. Like, why didn't I have a seat at the table for that decision? And so what that means is their yes equals yes, and their no equals a no. And if you're somebody who is driven by wanting a seat at the table, what you may notice if you are power is that you struggle to actually say no. Because saying no would be to exclude yourself, give up a seat at the table. So powers often are the style that takes on so much work, because as soon as somebody says, hey, can you help me out with this, it's a request. Powers like to hear requests. It gives them a have to. So they're saying yes before they even realize they have a habit of saying yes. So one of the big things I work with power people on in a coaching capacity is, let's get some things off your list so that you don't get yourself excluded because you're not getting enough things done. Does that make sense, everybody? Everybody with me on that?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Good, good. Best spot on the field for power people tends to be more in an operational lead, follow through on a project, production. They're great at putting structures in place to make sure we get things done. An alliance is a long-term relationship. So one of the things you will notice about influences and powers is that because of their sincerity base, they tend to build relationships easier than the other two styles. The difference is that influences will build a ton of new relationships. Powers won't build as many new relationships, but the ones that they build will turn into long-term repeat business. Okay, these are many times the people you know who have 20 best friends, and they're the ones that are staying in touch with everybody and keeping their group together. They're really good at that. That's what an alliance is. It's a long-term relationship. And their cardinal virtue is for justice or fairness. So if you really want to upset a power person, treat other people unfairly or be rude to people, and that'll really get power people upset because they don't like that behavior because they really believe in an inherent justice or fairness amongst a group of people. Okay? Questions, comments there? I'm assuming no.
Well, I'm just going to say this is Tammy Atlanta. I was laughing the whole time you were doing this because you were talking about me spot on. Like, that's incredible. I was so tickled.
Oh, and it's wonderful, right? It's like, and I appreciate you saying that, and it's like, yeah, I mean, that's who you are. That's who you are at your core. There's some good things about it. There might be some things that, you know, could get you in some trouble, and now you might have some awareness on it, and hopefully that helps you leverage the good stuff, right? That's all we're going for.
Definitely.
Perfect. Okay. Well, despite what Tammy's saying about power is an okay style, but now we finally get to the best style on the whole map here. Okay. Well, not that I'm an authority person. Okay, but I am an authority person, so I'm just teasing. But so don't, you know, I'm totally ridiculous there when I say that. But let me just take you through for 5 minutes an authority person. An authority person tends to build their reputation more around being a strong analyzer. So they're good at looking at a set of facts or looking at sets of data and culling through them and figuring out, you know, what's important, what's not important, that kind of thing. So the same meeting where you show up and the control guy's at the head of the table, the influence guy gets you introduced to everybody in the room, the power person blows in a couple minutes late because they're so busy working on everything. The authority guy was there 10 minutes early, and he's got all his data laid out, and he's ready to fire at you with a bunch of questions. Okay? So that's going to be the feel of the room many times when you have these different styles in the room. Okay? This style tends to hibernate, doesn't mean head in the sand, just means that they're trying to make the best decision, so they're going to use a lot of analytics. So you're going to see a lot of people in CFO, legal, accounting, appraisal type positions are going to be attracted to this profession because it's a natural place to go in and look at the past. And there's a lot of security in looking at those numbers and making sure we make the best decision. So they'll look for a lot of data. So this is the style that will make the most assertions and have, you know, the longest emails that you're getting often come from authority people because they've got to lay everything out and put in a lot of data and evidence and those kinds of things. Okay? So what you'll hear from this style is a phrase ought to have or should have. And it's a backwards-looking thing of, well, what we should have done on this project or what we ought to have done back there. So they're master critics, and I mean that with all due respect. I am an authority person. It's like they're really good at picking apart, like, what we could have done better. So, you know, going to an authority person to do a post-mortem after a project is a great idea because they tend to be really good at picking apart what you could have done better, or what you did well, that kind of stuff. It's a natural strength. Okay. For this style, kind of interesting, I think. Their yes equals a yes, just like a power, but their no equals a maybe. And what's interesting about that is that powers often struggle to say no. And if you look down at what authority people, their survival conversation is, if I have to make a decision without all of the information under the sun, I will die. So what you'll notice with authorities is they struggle to say yes. So powers are the quickest to say yes, and authorities are the slowest to say yes. And what you'll often find with an authority person is they start out at a no. So a lot of CFOs are known as CF no's, because what CFOs do is they start out with a no. And then you show them evidence why it's a good investment. You show them your business case. You show them your analytics, and their no's just a maybe, and once they see the data and the facts, they come around. But look at the difference that you got to have in strategy between a control and an authority. See, with a control person, no equals no, and with an authority, no equals maybe. So when you're dealing with a control and you get a no, you have to be really careful, because if you try to overcome them, you're now saying, look, you don't know what you're doing, Mr. Control, or at least that's what the control person's hearing, and their survival concern is if other people know that I don't know something, I will die, so they'll be very defensive. With an authority person, if they tell you no, you still have permission to keep going, showing them more evidence. And if you show them enough evidence, they may come around to your position. So you got to have a very different strategy with controls versus authorities, just based on how they respond when they use the word no. Okay? Authority people will, of course, fall into analysis paralysis. So while their strength is analytics, their weakness is analytics, because they'll overanalyze to the point where they won't make a decision. And what they will do many times in a breakdown is they'll just go into their office and shut the door, and everybody goes, hey, where'd that guy go? I guess he doesn't care about our decision. So other people will often move on without the authority person if the authority person isn't careful. From a best spot on the field perspective, again, authority people tend to be really strong in analytics. So you put them in charge of things like quality control, administration, follow-through, long-term follow-through. They tend to be very disciplined, so this is a great spot for them. They're very good at standards and traditions and making sure that we're hitting the standards. What confrontation means, you guys, because that can be a loaded word, but from a leadership standpoint, what really good authority people are able to do is confront people and projects that are not working. Okay, and they're able to say, without killing the mood of the room, they're able to say, look, got some evidence here about why this isn't working. If we try something different, it could go better in the future. And we call that a confrontation move. So this is the style that many times doesn't let us go off course. And what you'll notice with this style many times is that they're a little bit more prudent. So where an influence person might be a first mover, authority person might, not be a first mover per se. They might need a little more data and analytics. But when they go, their yes is a yes, so they'll be all in. And that's the thing you'll get from authority people is when they say yes, they've done their due diligence, and now they're all in on it. And they don't tend to change direction once they've said yes. Okay? So questions, comments there on authority people? Okay. Good. Well, let's do this. Let me put up your indicator results, and then we can talk a little bit more about how you guys tested out, take any questions you have on all four styles. If you didn't read up on your indicator, let me just give you the 2-minute overview. There are 23 questions in the indicator that you took. 3 of those questions are weighted, and they're used as tiebreakers only. There are 20 core questions, so everybody's raw score adds up to 20. If you didn't have a tie, the tiebreakers are obviously disregarded. The methodology of the test is to put one style versus one style in each answer set. Why? Because that introduces the most pressure. If we gave you all 4 styles in every answer set, you would start to see a pattern, and whether you like it or not, you would start answering more how you want to be seen versus hopefully, more how you are. And the request, we don't have to do it this week, but make sure next week that you have your raw score with you, because as we go through this, you guys, your raw score becomes important not only in what your primary style is but as you'll see next week, what your secondary style is. And if you ever want to use this indicator in a recruiting context, it's a great way to look at recruits from which direction are they trending on our maps. Are they going clockwise or counterclockwise? And as we'll talk about next week, we want people to be going clockwise. And so a lot of people will test out counterclockwise, and it gives you a great discussion point in a recruiting context to kind of check that and see if there's somebody who's going to go counterclockwise, which tends to cause more problems in the game of business, has been our experience. Okay? So with that all said, I know a lot of you don't know each other, but I just wanted to give you an experience of how people tested on the call. And as you look at these results, a couple things to just give you an idea of. Number one is 70% of the time when people take this, their second highest score is the style counterclockwise. About 15% of the time when people take this, their second highest score is clockwise. About 10% of the time when people take this, their score is a split. So did we get any splits on here? Where their second highest is, not right next door to them. Yeah, so like Sonia tested out, and Sonia, you actually said in your homework that you think this could be close to accurate, that you're somewhere between a dictate, which is control, and a tolerate, which is power. So, your score with a 6 of control and 6 of the power is a split. Okay, and then 5% of the time, people will test out in a 3-way or a 4-way tie, and in this group, we didn't have any 3-way or 4-way ties. Okay. Maybe the other thing, just to give you a little bit more background on it, and then I'll take any questions that people have. The highest score you can get in any one category is a 10. So like Tammy, you look at yours, you tested out as a 9 at power. That's a pretty high result. You look at, like Paul's result, Lauren, a lot of you actually, James, okay, testing out where your highest score is a 6. So when you get up into the 8-9 category, typically what people will report is that that's pretty close to what their style is, and a lot of people around you would agree. 8 when you're up at 8 or 9. When you're more in the 6 or 7 range, and like Chris, if you're on the call, you look at Chris's. She's a 7 at authority, 6 at power, 5 at control. Those numbers are pretty close. So if Chris came back to me and said, you know what, Travis, I think I'm a power or I think I'm a control, I wouldn't be shocked. If Chris came back to us and said, well, I actually think I'm an influence, typically the test is not that far off. It's more directionally accurate, if anything at all. Okay? And so like Kim, it's somewhat rare for someone to get a 0 in a particular category, just like it's also rare for somebody to get a 10 in any one category. So that's kind of interesting. Okay. But does anybody have any questions just based off looking at either their results or anything that we've discussed over the last, 50 minutes or so?
What do you mean going clockwise? I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Yeah. So clockwise is, and I started doing it today, and if I wasn't expressly clear on it, clockwise would mean on the grid going to the right.
Okay.
So we use this little mapping function. I'm just trying, well, here's one. Okay, I know this isn't perfect, but so control is at the top, influence is at the right, power is at the bottom, and authority is at the left. So we use this little mapping technology also. So was that Sonia? Was that Sonia?
It's Lauren.
I'm sorry? Oh, Lauren. Okay. Yeah, so Lauren, let's go back and look at yours. The prediction would be that the second highest for you would actually be control. How did you actually test out?
I think I go influence and then control, but I'm not sure because you're not on my slide.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and now the slide isn't moving, so let me see if I can get it to go here. Influence.
Yeah, I was influence and then control.
And
influence and then power.
Similar with power. Okay, so with that signaling there, and again, guys, look, the indicator is not a representation of like who you are whole and complete. It's just an indicator. It's just a data point, okay? But it's almost like, Lauren, I would look at yours and go, well, you're equally as disposed to when you feel pressure, you might head towards power, and when you feel pressure, you might also head towards control. And again, foreshadowing to next week, we would want you to head more towards power because the response to go counterclockwise is actually the biological response that will help save your life, but will also hurt you in the game of business over time.
Okay.
Okay? So like Renee, second highest, might point more towards going counterclockwise. James, same kind of thing, where he's equally predisposed potentially to going clockwise or counterclockwise. You know, clockwise would, of course, be from authority back to control. Tamara's got from authority to power, which is counterclockwise. Chris has got from authority to power, which is counterclockwise. Kim has no counterclockwise, according to this. No counterclockwise. So she goes from power to authority, and she never goes backwards. So Kim, you get an A+. I'm just teasing you guys. None of this is like graded, okay, but it's just food for thought. Okay, Brenda's counterclockwise from power to influence. Tammy has a clockwise from power to authority. And as well as Julie has a clockwise from power to authority. So as does Sean from influence to power. So none of these, again, I'm not saying it's like it's a good or bad thing. Try not to introduce judgment, but just from an awareness perspective, what we're going to be showing you next week is the more you go clockwise, the more prosperity you tend to produce. The more you go counterclockwise, the more recurrent problems you tend to encounter. Okay.
Travis, what about, so this is Sonia. On mine, I skip over one. So it's control.
You've got a
I'm
split personality.
I'm bipolar, so
yes,
I don't know how to, what do I do
You
for
need
that?
medication. Okay, you need medication. I'm just teasing, okay? No, but it's very interesting because if you're a control person with the second highest to power, a lot of times what that'll mean, Sonia, is you have these ideas for the future and you won't let anybody else work on it. You'll actually do it yourself. Okay? If you're a power with a secondary control, you do a lot of work and you'll check in occasionally and look big picture on where you're trying to go in the future. So again, neither one of those are bad or good. It's just that might be your response to pressure. What you've been saying in your homeworks and a little bit on this course is that you might more tolerate, so more power at first, and then once you're done tolerating, you'll go up to control and just kind of take things over. So even though your tiebreaker,
right? Is that
well, no,
counterclockwise?
It's actually jumping back and forth. It's a pretty big split. It's again, none of this is bad or good, and but it would show me that you're more on the power side, like even based on your homework response, which was to, hammer it through, run around, take care of people, do some things like that, jump in there, get the work done. Even though your tiebreaker here broke more towards control, I might still see you more on the power side, but your secondary might be that, the longer you're under pressure, the more you'll just absolutely take things over, kick everybody else off the project, do it yourself. And here's the thing, you guys, is we do an indicator like this because people like these types of tests. If I had had my way, I never would have introduced it into the world, because once you put a test in front of somebody, they argue with the test. More than anything else, we like to do it, and we really like to set that it's a data point. We just want you starting to get some awareness around this, like what do you do first, what do you do second? And regardless of how you test it out, once you get an experience of what you do first, what we'd like you to learn to do second is the one clockwise. What you may start noticing is what you actually do second under pressure, what feels tempting to do under pressure is go counterclockwise, to go to the left.
So if I'm on the clock 12 and 6, am I going clockwise or counterclockwise? How would you look at that? Do you always start at control, so would that be considered counterclockwise, or am I? swinging back up
No,
towards
no,
12
you don't always start.
clockwise.
The key, Sonia, would be to figure out what's your primary, okay? And then from there, see, under pressure, will you more worry about taking care of people, or would you more worry about doing analytics on whether or not something's working or not working?
It depends on the project. You have to put the actual situation in front of me.
Okay. What did you do in the situation that you had?
In the situation that I had, I did get the project done.
Yeah,
so,
true. You got it done, and along the way, did you stop to think about taking care of people, or did you start taking a look at who had broke their promises and who didn't do their job?
Oh, no, I just took care of people to get it done.
Yeah. And it's not that that's bad or good, but what you may notice over time, if that is always your approach, is that you become the pushover. Like everybody goes, well, I don't have to do my responsibility. Sonia will always take care of us. Mm. And that's the breakdown for powers, potentially, Sonia, of always going back towards influence and taking care of people under pressure, is that other people go, I don't have to do it, Sonia will do it. Now, look, I know you had to get that project over the line. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm not trying to say something negative, but because you're asking, yes, what I would say from your homework response is that you are power, and that what you did under pressure is you both hammered out the project and you took care of people. And it's not that that's bad, but if you invest in, and that's your only response ever to pressure, people will start going, you know what, I don't have to be accountable. Sonia will just take care of it if there's a breakdown. And that happens a lot to power people. They become pushovers. Now, look, every single style, when they go counterclockwise, has a negative connotation. So I'm not just picking on Sonia. Like, it's bad for all of us when we go counterclockwise is the point. Anybody else have any other questions at this point about anything you've seen today? Comments, observations? Anybody feel like this indicator was way off for them? Which is okay. We get that periodically. So anybody feel like it was just way off?
Hey, Travis, this is Paul.
Yeah.
I don't think it was way off, but I took the market force survey, I don't know, a year ago, and I was a power on the app from my my iPhone. So it's just kind of interesting how now I'm more of a influence and even control than a power.
Yep. No, you're maturing. I'm just teasing.
I hope so.
Yeah, exactly. No, but it's interesting, Paul, because I mean, Paul, you know, you're hearing the training on this a little bit more now than you've heard in the past. Do you think that's accurate? I mean, would you put yourself more in an influence, control, or power category, you know, based on what you've seen so far, regardless of what the indicator says? Where do you think you would come down?
I've always kind of felt like I was a power, but now I'm seeing a lot more influence in my personality, and Kim always laughs and says I'm an influence. So I think I'm probably more of a powered influence just from my own feeling. But, you know, this test said I have a lot of control characteristics.
Yeah, okay, and see, I think your self-diagnosis is accurate. You know, Paul's also somebody that he and I have worked together a little bit over the last, 6-7 months. And to be honest, Paul, a lot of what we've worked on, or what I've been focusing on, thinking that you were a power, is actually getting you more into a control space in terms of how you deal with some of the teams inside your office and things like that. So, you know, a lot of this stuff, you guys, over time will change. And especially when you have awareness around it, what you can do is you can start to work on different areas by choice. Remember what we've been saying is the only way that your style, the worst thing that can happen is you don't have any awareness on what your style is, which means under pressure you have a very predictable response. When you start getting awareness on your style, you can actually live outside your style if you want, or you can move around, you can create more versatility, or you can bring people around you who do things that maybe you don't do as well. So a lot of people, when they first experience styles, now none of you said this, but a lot of people who do experience this conversation for the first time will actually report that they feel like they're being put in a box. When people stick with the conversation a little bit, what you realize is we're actually letting you out of the box. Because the box is your biology and your natural response to pressure. And once you see that you have that response and you realize there's no real pressure in this game of business, you actually have a lot more versatility than you may have had yesterday. Okay, so that's a long-winded way of saying, Paul, I think your analysis is right. I would put you more in the power with your secondary to influence. And I think we've been doing a lot of work on control-type behavior with some of the things that you've been encountering in your office. So it doesn't surprise me that that quotient might be going up. Does that make sense to you, Paul?
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And that was my big question, too. This is Kim, is if people change and evolve over time.
Yeah.
And, you know, we've talked so much about how this is an instinct and
Yep.
some of it is chemically involved. Because I think I've
Yep.
changed.
Well, what's interesting, I mean, Kim, you know, we sure don't want to pretend like we have all the answers, and I hope I never come across that way. And oh my gosh, I just realized I misspelled your name, so I apologize. But the idea here is, without sounding too braggadocious, is I actually think we're talking about the evolution. See, there have been no biological changes to the human biology in the last 20,000 years. I think the more awareness that we have around what happens to us biologically gives us the chance, Kim, to actually behave a little different than what our biology is telling us to do. And that actually has us behave a little bit less like animals and a little bit more civilized and a little bit more like humans. Mm-hmm. And so as we go through this, you guys, what you will notice is the most prosperous people you know are many times the hardest people for you to identify what their style is. Because whether it's through training, through experience, through instinct, through luck, they have figured out that the more versatile they become in their lives, the more prosperous they're going to be. But what we're saying is versatility is many times hamstrung by your biology. And if you can't see what your style is, it's almost like you have no choice in the moment of pressure. You're just going to do something that is going to be very predictable. And somebody put us on hold. Does that make sense, Kim?
Yeah, it really makes sense, because I feel like the reason that I've changed over the years before I ever took this is because certain things worked and certain things didn't work in my particular position. So I moved on and tried different things that were effective, then that was forced, so I would use that again.
I love how we're just talking through the, there we go. But look, you guys, we're out of time, but to Kim's point, see, look, you guys, if we all lived forever, we would all figure this out. The whole reason that Colliers has brought a human behavior model like market force into the environment is so that there could be some common language around it. So, you know, Kim and Paul work together. So hopefully what happens for Kim and Paul is they're able to say, you know, Kim, for example, if you are power, Paul's able to say to you, hey, Kim, you know, you're seems like you're pretty triggered by what I said. What did I say? What, you know, how can we work this through? There's no real pressure here. Let's just keep moving forward. What can we do? And we have a common language to work through it. So that now when you guys are working with people in your office, you can go, hey, Jim is a control and Jack is an influence. How are we going to approach them in this particular breakdown or this particular issue? And what we find is it makes the game of business a little bit more fun and a little less stressful, which keeps everybody's biology at bay, which increases the versatility, which allows us to thrive. Because prosperity isn't a survival game. I think I mentioned to you guys, only 4.6% of Americans make more than $200,000 a year. Many, many, many people are becoming predisposed to working on break-even. But if you're going to make a lot of money in your life and have a lot of extra time and a lot of surplus and live in abundance, you can't be operating in survival. And so just like you're saying, Kim, we're trying to accelerate the rate at which people learn this by putting a framework around what most successful people have learned through instinct anyway. Okay? Fair place to end?
Yep.
Yeah, that's great.
That's great.
Yeah,
Okay.
very interesting debate. Great class.
Great. Well, I appreciate it, you guys. Thank you very much for that. What I will do is send you the homework for next week, which will be more about, like, watch a movie and think about the styles involved or pick some politicians. So we try to have some fun with it. And then next week what we'll do is we'll really focus in on, well, how do authorities do with influences typically? And what about controls with powers? And, you know, we'll start answering those questions. So try to be in that mind space now about identifying some other people. And then next week we'll spend another hour on, you know, what happens out there with others in the world. It's a lot of fun, okay? Okay. Thank you all very much.
Yeah,
Have a great week. You bet.
Thanks,
See you
Robert.
next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.